Welcome back to Question Answers, everybody. I'm Dan Casey, and today we're doing something a little bit different. Now, usually this is the after show for our ongoing actual play TTRPG series, Sagas of Sundry Goblin Mode, but today we're going to zoom out the lens a little bit. We're going to talk about the art and the interplay of role-playing, storytelling, game design for tabletop role-playing games, and joining me to help break down this unique craft from his perspective is my very special guest, pro athlete, pro role player, and pro game designer, Johnny Stanton. Johnny, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me to disappoint everybody who's hoping for the after show.
No.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
This is a sweet relief from my usual blathering about what we just did on screen. So I'm very curious. You are someone who is all over the world of tabletop role-playing games, but I'm curious, how did you first start getting into this world? What was your entry point into the world of sitting down with pen and paper and dice?
Oh man, there's like 2 points in which, there's everybody's introduction into tabletop role-playing game, and then there's the introduction into like the performance side, which is a whole weird thing that like a handful of us get to do. And, it's with like media being so democratized and YouTube and podcasts, but anybody can make a show if they want to, and it has the opportunity to blow up. It's so, it's so wide open to everybody. But my first introduction to tabletop role-playing game was through a YouTube channel called Corridor Digital, or more specifically their partner channel called Node, in which they played I think a Pokemon version of D&D, which kind of introduced me to it. I was a fan of their channel, and I'm like, I knew about Dungeons and Dragons, had no idea what it was actually like. I think probably that Pokemon game gave me a bad first impression, but it interested me enough to watch their other campaigns, and it interested me enough to go to my local comic book shop, where I was a regular on every Wednesday afternoon, picking up new copies of issues and asking, hey, what's, you guys are nerds, the only nerdy people that I know, where's the place to play D&D? Is it here? And they got me set up with a game that had just started like 2 weeks prior. And that game I played in for a good probably 8 to 9 months. It was like newcomers coming in and out, and it was my first time role playing, so it was very new for me as somebody who didn't get the opportunity to be a theater kid. And I'm living out my theater kid dreams now. But from that point, I introduced it to some teammates when I was at UNLV. I then got picked up by the Minnesota Vikings, and I had my longest period of not playing Dungeons and Dragons, which was hard on my soul. But that's when I started getting into like the world of actual D&D as media. Because I'd seen it on YouTube that one time, but I didn't know that there was Critical Role. I didn't know about the Adventure Zone, and this was back in like 2017 or so, 2016, 2017. So it was still kind of right there on the upswing of 5th edition and everybody kind of getting into it, but it was a whirlwind and completely supplanted my nerddom for comic books, and now it's just tabletop role-playing games and Dungeons & Dragons, which is fun. As far as my introduction into like the world of performing for D&D, that was the first thing I ever did. Was a little show run by one of the creators of Pixel Circus, Kaylee Bray. She DM'd a game for me and a couple other people who I'm still friends with to this day in this space, and that was during the pandemic in 2020. But things kind of really blew up for me when I wore my Critical Role shirt to the night of my one and only touchdown in the NFL, where I was wearing that jersey right above me.
Oh, amazing! That's awesome.
Yeah.
I just also love that. I love that pathway into it, because it is something that it's a hobby that really taps into, I think, different passions for people, whether you really invested on the writing side, or you like performing, or you like this sense of communal storytelling. It is, at the end of the day, it's a team building game. You're building this sense of camaraderie and telling a story together. So it makes sense that it would translate to the locker room and things like that, and playing with your teammates as well.
It was such a great opportunity for me to, when I joined the Browns, it was in the middle of the pandemic. I had signed in January of 2020, and we didn't get to go to spring ball that year because of everything going on. So it was really hard to develop relationships with guys on the team. You're trying to do it over computer screen as a new player on the team when everybody else already has their relationships. And I think we started during maybe. Like I think I brought it up to Miles the first time, which was like a big Myles Garrett, last year's defensive player of the year, one of the best, guys in the NFL, one of the best edge rushers in the NFL. And I brought it up to him because he was wearing a Stranger Things shirt at the facility. I'm like, hey, have you ever tried playing the game that they play in Stranger Things, Dungeons and Dragons? And he says, no, I'd be down to try. So it was such a great opportunity to build relationships with guys on the team. And, you're building it inside the building, but we didn't get that opportunity to really build it outside the building. And even inside, you're supposed to be distancing, staying at least 6 feet away from people wearing masks. Mm-hmm. It was a hard time for everybody to build relationships within a football facility was no different, but getting to have that one piece away from football where you got to connect with guys was really important and special to me. And it was really fun to have it become what it was, and introducing Miles to the world of Dungeons and Dragons, and introducing the world of Dungeons and Dragons and nerds and TTRPG to football and to Myles Garrett and to some of the coolest things that I love about both sides really got highlighted to people who had never experienced them before.
Yeah, I love that crossover. It sort of speaks to your experience as well of walking into your local comic book store and saying like, hey, I want to play. How can they make this happen? I think a lot of people sometimes there's this sense that they'll be gate kept out of a hobby like this, or they might feel it's too intimidating to get into. It's very cool that Miles was just down to clown, down to try it out. But how do you pitch a game like D&D or other TTRPGs to people that maybe are a little apprehensive about trying them?
It's it's the ever-present problem of too many players, not enough DMs. I think is the biggest hurdle to get. So I think a lot of people who are finding themselves at a loss for people to play with are people who are experienced players but not experienced dungeon masters, and they're having trouble making that leap. And trust me, if you're a dungeon master, you're having no issue finding players for your game. You just end up being a magnet to people who know D&D, and just make it. I don't think, as somebody, I was in a lucky position of getting to have it be almost like a novelty. As somebody who was in the NFL, who's a Dungeons and Dragons nerd, so I got the opportunity to have people kind of respect that in a way a lot quicker than some other people might. But I think that people are also afraid of putting themselves out there in that way as somebody who is really nerdy. It's becoming less and less taboo, which I think is amazing. But the more people make it part of their don't make it your whole personality necessarily, but make it something that people can associate with you. And when they do see like, oh wait, that movie with Chris Pine's on Netflix now, Dungeons and Dragons, I think my buddy Johnny plays that. Maybe we can talk about it at some point. And that just opens the door to further conversation and just kind of leaving little sprinkles on it as a trail into becoming obsessed.
Yeah, and look, to me, it's no nerdier or more impenetrable than people who also play fantasy football. You're building your party of beefy paladins to accomplish the goal of conquering your opponent each week. I really enjoy both, but I love that there's this way to just sort of break these barriers down, like raise the portcullis, lower the drawbridge, everyone come on in. Now, I definitely agree with you.
One thing, when you mentioned fantasy football, which I think is such an easy comparison, it's like there's a lot of math involved. There's a lot of suspension of disbelief. There is, but I think the main, like the biggest thing that I think is really analogous between the two is just the sense of community. And a fantasy football group, there's usually a group text involved. There is usually some way of meeting, oftentimes in person, like you would in a D&D group when there's draft day and stuff. So. But oftentimes there's not as many people starting groups as there are people being invited into groups. Right. And it's that same kind of thing of, do you want to join our D&D table? Do you want to join our fantasy football group? And I think there's a lot of comparisons there that you can make. And I don't think it's any scarier than asking somebody to be part of your fantasy football group. Except there's a few more funny voices involved.
Yeah, look, both are ultimately expensive hobbies. It depends on what fantasy football group you're in. There's still going to be funny voices, people clowning on you if you don't start the right people. But you mentioned something as well about, your point was well taken about how there's a plethora of players, but there's never enough DMs to go around. I'm curious for you, when did you first take the leap into being behind the screen, and what was that experience like?
My first time dungeon mastering was when I was in college, right after, it was my second group ever. It was after I had been introduced at that comic book shop with this new group. And my thought process was, this is a lot of fun. I love the idea of being able to tell the story in your own head and with the people at the table. But I want to do it with people that I already have a relationship with, that I'm already close with. I'm building these friendships with the people at the comic book shop, but it's people that I'm seeing every other week. It's a lot of times people are missing or I don't know them necessarily. I'm not seeing them outside of that context.
For sure.
I want to play it with people who I do know outside of that context and kind of build that relationship that already exists with them. So that's when I decided to ask what I saw as the three nerdiest guys on my football team at UNLV. And they accepted and came over to my apartment, and we played, I think in total maybe like 6 sessions, so nothing crazy, but it was really just like my own reskin of the Adventure Zone Bureau like balance season.
Oh, amazing!
I think that's the best way of playing D&D as a new DM. Is you don't need to create your whole new world from scratch. Pick up a book, of which there are many. Pick up Sync when it comes out. Or you can just reskin something you already have experienced. Experienced DMs already do that with their own game. Of like, oh, you know what? I really liked watching Get Out. I thought that was a super cool movie. I want to build my D&D story off of Get Out and like kind of the myth, this mythology kind of behind it. Everybody's inspired by different things. How much you take from that inspiration, I think, is what you learn as you become an experienced DM. But if you know that there's a story or a book that you really love that maybe isn't super mainstream, and maybe the players at your table haven't experienced it, try to make sure at first. but just rip it off. Like, no, you're not making money off of it. Probably.
Yes.
There's no way of having that be any morally gray. You're just at a D&D table playing a D&D version of it.
No, especially if you're trying to get people into this for the first time. What's the old saying? Good artists borrow, great artists steal. In this case, you're paying homage, something you love, something they'll love. And I think I love that you adapted the first season of Adventure Zone, because that in and of itself starts with D&D's starter adventure, Lost Mines of Phandelver. It's the perfect entry point. So I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
what was
I was just going to say it was a fun experience of learning that was completely a completely acceptable way of playing tabletop role playing games.
100%. And that's, I think as well, a lot of people sometimes hesitate when they come to it. Either they feel like they have to build their world entirely from scratch, or they have to buy the perfect module that'll fit their group's interests. But I really think you can split the difference between the two. Yeah. Do you, in your experience over the years, and we'll get into what you're in the process of creating and have created and will be coming out with, do you find yourself drawn more towards full homebrew, or do you like finding modules to run and then putting your own spin on them?
I think modules have, and not just because I'm biased, but I think modules are incredibly useful to learn from. I think it is built to run as its own campaign, but the way that a module is written might not be the way that you play Dungeons and Dragons. When I look through a book that WotC produces that has a certain amount of adventures, and maybe each individual adventure is really well thought out. But in my experience, there are some times where the adventures don't connect in a way that I want them to, or I want to have a lot more player backstory play a role in the world. So what I ended up doing was I did a very similar thing in the Adventure Zone, which was I picked up Dragon of Icespire Peak and ran that for the first arc of the adventure. And we went through 8 sessions with my wife and her 2 brothers, playing different characters, going through Dragon of Icespire Peak, sprinkling in some backstory from their own backstory in there. And then I said, okay, the rest of it is gone. This world is still the Sword Coast and Faerun, but it's my own version of the Sword Coast. You're going to Neverwinter, but it's my own version of Neverwinter. I'm using the names, and it's nothing crazy. Like I can pick a different name. That's not a big deal. But it's a completely new world. Like my Waterdeep, which is like their whole second, third arc, is there. I went literal with the name. Like this is a city in the middle of a lake that is just a pillar going down into the water.
Oh, fantastic! I love that.
Just live in like this like cylindrical city. So yeah, just like don't feel like you need to, if you're going to take a step away from it and go into homebrew, you don't need to leap completely out of the lane and do your own things. And like I didn't feel like, oh, you know what, now that I'm telling my own story, it should really be its own world. Like no, it's its own version of the Sword Coast, and kind of I think of it as like, the Ultimates version from Marvel Comics. So like this is like the this isn't Earth 616. This is the Ultimates version of what Sword Coast looks like.
I love that because it is your own world every time you and your party sit down at the table to play. You're always putting your spin on it. It's never going to be exactly literally as it happens on the page, because any DM can attest that goes right out the window when a player has a bright idea. I dig that quite a bit. DMs, the best, it's just like improv. The best DMs listen to their players and allow that to inform their own choices. When I was on Adventuring Academy with Brennan Lee Mulligan, we had this conversation about world building and how like people feel the pressure to create this whole new world, to create this sandbox effect that people can just play wherever they want. If they want to go to this one thing, they whatever draws them will be what they get to focus on. And I think that is, if that works for you, amazing. I don't work that way. I need to be able to know kind of the direction in which people are going and then build the train tracks as they're building, as they're going along. It's not railroading if you're building the railroads, 10 feet in front of the train, where you're like allowing it to be, allowing the story to be told collaboratively. And you're not telling a story to the players as it's coming. You are letting their own decisions influence you and how the world is built around them. I appreciate that approach to it, because as a player, I am always aware of, or I try to be aware. I say, I'm sure DMs would disagree with me. I try to be aware of, there is a destination the DM wants us to go to, because they've clearly put in a lot of prep work, or the appearance of a lot of prep work, into where this story should be going. So as fun as it is to be, like murder hobo, chaos gremlin, at the end of the day, you do want to tell this story together. So I don't mind a bit of light railroading, because I'm trying to stay within the bounds of this world to make it feel real and get to the next exciting sequence in this story that we're telling together at the table. Yeah, I grew up playing video games, and it influences a lot of my own storytelling now, especially in the building of Sync. And I realized as I've gotten older and have had less and less time to be able to play video games, I am not somebody who goes crazy for the sandbox experience, goes crazy for something that is open world and you can get distracted by anything. I am one of the very few, probably 1% of people who just could not latch on to Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, just because the world is too open for me, that I feel like I need something to kind of guide me along. And I'm sure somebody's going to say, "Oh, you're playing it wrong." Like, well, whatever. It's just my own opinion. I think my own personal view is that I like a guided experience. I don't need it to be, doing exactly what you're being told, but a little bit of leeway to the left and to the right, I think is important to me, while it is going in a very intentional direction. No, I get that 100%. I think sometimes I think that I want 100+ hour open world experience, and then I find myself never finishing it, because it's too, it's like when you're looking at a diner menu and there are simply too many choices, where you're just paralyzed by that indecision, when you really just want, waffles and some eggs on the side and some bacon. It's a simple choice, but
I do realize the hypocrisy of what I just said, though, because I'm about 250 hours into Baldur's Gate, and I just decide, like, I'm just trying to do everything perfectly and going, I'm in Act 3, I'm like near the end of the story, but I'm like, I just want to get everything done. But it's like, it's different. It's not Assassin's Creed where I can, or GTA, where I'm just like, oh, I want to do this and this and this. I don't like that kind of experience. I want to be able to finish one thing and then just keep going with it.
Well, I will say about Baldur's Gate, it is expansive, but it is finite. It's not it's not something where it's just like this one quest line keeps constantly regenerating.
Yeah.
And yes, I also went back after clearing the Underdark to do the mountain pass because I didn't want to miss anything, because I'm like,
doesn't do that?
All right, I've got to get it home. I want to make sure I get this in the first run, because I don't know if I'll be guaranteed runs 2 through 12. But I can definitely appreciate that. I'm a completionist when it comes to RPGs in particular, but if they're too expansive, sometimes it can be a bit daunting.
Turns you away from it, for sure.
But since we're talking about game design, this is a natural pivot point. You're not only a fantastic GM and performer, but also now you are a game designer. Tell me about the impetus behind your company, Crimson Herald, and the first initiative you folks are undertaking with Sync.
Yeah, so Crimson Herald was something I started to kind of allow for some organization in developing what became Sync Adventures on the Call to Reach Sea. It is now a 4-way partnership between the 3 creators and Hit Point Press. I was blanking on it. Hit Point Press is our publisher and partner in the project. And originally, in 2023, we were going through the process of, I'm good friends with my co-writer, Rick Escavius. I've known him since 2018. After I got, hurt with the Minnesota Vikings, Rick was in that first D&D group that I started playing D&D with again. And then in 2023, I got to meet Sam Rusk, who I had been very familiar with her art style and kind of creating that American traditional tattoo art, but what they call pop traditional, kind of creating these bright colors and instilling this nerdy, pop media style to it. And long story short, we end up deciding to work on something together. We decided to call it Treasures of a Deep Grotto, which turned into our one-shot adventure that released as on Free RPG Day in 2024. And this was a one-shot that we were excited about. We wanted to build a dungeon. We wanted to build a dungeon crawler that included pirates and tattoos. That was our main thing. So we did that. We developed a one-shot and we play tested it a bunch. We had all of our friends play it. And then in developing it, I thought, well, let's see what this could be. And we decided to go to PAX Unplugged in 2023 and figure out, okay, is anybody interested in this? I set up like 15 meetings for us over the course of 3 days to try to meet with publishers, see if anybody was interested, see who the best team to work with would be. And we very quickly realized that Hit Point Press would give us not only the best opportunity to succeed, but best opportunity for this book to be what we want it to be. And we set a time aside, like next September was what our plan was to make this Kickstarter. And we ended up raising about $280,000 on Kickstarter and another 20-something on BackerKit. So we can, I think officially say over 300,000 on crowdfunding.
That's amazing.
And yeah, we're now in the trenches building it now, because Treasures of Deep Grotto was the very first thing that we built, and it was a great framework to work within. We're building kind of like this bounce around the Call to Reach Sea island chain in which you are fighting warlocks trying to steal souls on behalf of their eldritch god Igathul, and you are a pirate trying to stop that from happening with some help along the way with some magic item tattoos, which is like a big part of our book. In fact, we in the development of this, we just I think at this point I can say with a good amount of confidence that we are all done with our magic item tattoos. We wanted to make 54 to make a full playing card deck plus 2 jokers.
Oh, that's very cool.
So we have 54 magic item tattoos done, and they're going to all end up in a playing card deck that some backers of the Kickstarter will be able to get their hands on. And if you didn't back it at that level at Kickstarter, it's also super easy to just order that little extra add-on on BackerKit now.
Amazing. And we'll put those links in the description below for people listening or watching this. I love that, the playing card deck idea. I always love a tactile tool that you can use to give to players, because theater of the mind is wonderful, but when you can do something like that that's unexpected, I think it just really, you can see the delight spread on their faces.
Yeah, no, it was when one of the most fun things about developing a Kickstarter, there's a lot of fun things. There's a lot of things that are not fun at all. And one of the things that I thought was the most fun was trying to just determine what like add-on items would would benefit the project. We don't want to just throw things in there. We don't want to have like 17 sets of dice, and that's your thing. That's amazing, but it's not like what we were excited to do. But one thing that we really wanted to do was have the choice of magic item tattoos be front and center. So we have temporary tattoos that you can like put on your own skin. We actually had an add-on in which you can get a tattoo from Sam, because Sam is a full-time tattoo artist, and we actually just had our first backer who backed at that tier get her tattoo. So it was a 4-hour tattoo session with Sam that she flew out for, and the art is super super cool. We were sharing it in the Sync Discord over the last week or so, and and the playing card deck was something that we decided, okay, we want like a deck of cards. There's also the magic item cards that some people do that Hit Point Press is honestly very, very good at. That's like one of their specialties is these like extra items and especially cards. But we decided that it would be really cool with the number of tattoos that we wanted to do to just, let's not make 2 different card products. Let's make one. Right. Let's make playing cards. This is something that you can use, even outside of D&D. This is something you can pass out to players when they have that item. But this is also something you can just be playing poker with at your own home.
Hey, we love a multi-purpose gaming accessory. That's fantastic. Now I love this from a design perspective, but I'm curious as well, going from designing like a home game, for example, what's been the biggest challenge or surprise when it came to designing a campaign setting and a module like Sync?
The most unexpectedly hard part is making sure that everything feels really intentional. And like I mentioned earlier, you can pick up a WotC book and pick out different adventures that maybe they don't, and this isn't to downplay what WotC is able to do with making these books. They have incredible writers on it, but a lot of times it's a lot of different writers without one, not without one vision, but maybe the singular vision isn't as prioritized as making sure that like each individual adventure is really, really well done. One thing we wanted to do is that we really take pride in is that the creators of the book are just the 3 of us. It is 1 artist and 2 writers. And creating the singular vision, for one, is definitely hard, but especially hard when we are marketing our book. And one thing that we were really excited about was the fact that it is modular. We were looking at these books making their book of, like, there's these companies making their books of one shots, and which I think is incredible and super useful, especially when you're introducing people to Dungeons and Dragons. But what we wanted to do was, well, there's these book of one shots. What if we were doing like a book of dungeons, and you could just plug and play them into your game, whether or not you're playing a pirate adventure. So we are definitely playing a pirate adventure. There's going to be plenty of pirates in this, but there's also islands in which there is like this ice castle that you're trying to siege. There's an island of like a volcano in which you're like delving into the volcano and fighting off lava monsters and such. So what we're hoping to do is the challenge that came up was, how much is it modular? How much are we telling a singular story? How much can we combine those 2 things while still, not ramming our head up into a wall trying to figure out how to do it? So I think we're doing a very good job right now in developing this story. And, we don't have the most amount of adventures. We have a handful of dungeons. I think at this point it's 6. But we want each and every one of them to feel really intentional and like they are connected, but can be played separately if that's what you want to do. If you're running into an area where you want an island of this ice castle with a sleeping white dragon, you can plug that into your own game, and then when is done, you're going off into the rest of your world. So, like I mentioned earlier, the modularity is something that I love in my own games and taking tools from. And I know I've speaking a lot on the modularity of it all, but I think like I mentioned, we marketed it on the modularity of it, as well as the magic item tattoos and the artwork. And modularity, not just in adventure, but also in mechanics. And that's something that I feel like I am learning a lot about personally as a game designer, is that I love developing mechanics. And the sunken condition, the soul link mechanic that we have decided to bring into this and added a whole new condition to Dungeons and Dragons 5e is the sunken condition, in which your hit die now represents the tether to your own soul. And if you end up at 0 hit points while having 0 hit die left, which can happen not only through short rests, but also through different effects or different abilities that your magic items might have, your character is dead. There is no getting up from 0 hit points. There is no revivify. Your character is dead. And what we're hoping is to really build up the tension and the dread of it all, while having those fun like items that you can use at, oh, I'm using an action to use my hit die to buff my weapon in some way, or to like cast, give them disadvantage on a spell, or all of the million ideas that we've had and tried to narrow them down into 54 for the magic item tattoos.
Well, I love that, because I'm a big fan of making player mortality and player death feel like a very real threat or very real possibility. Ever since playing a game of Cyberpunk 2020 back in the day and my character just getting turned into a Jackson Pollock painting, I was like, oh, holy cow, I didn't think that was possible. I thought I would just respawn, but no. And in D&D as well, it's just, speaking of, you mentioned your talk with Brennan Lee Mulligan on Adventuring Academy. I loved your point about your thoughts about death saves and doing them as like a private thing between you and the DM. I love ways to ratchet up that tension, and having a condition like this where it makes hit die important in a way that you might not think about beyond when you're leveling up your character and figuring out, okay, how many more hit points do I get? I like that it brings that mechanic back around.
It's a resource that I know at the beginning of 5e, WotC was dissuading game designers to use that as a resource, but it's on everybody's character sheet, and it's something that you really only think about maybe once a session, or maybe once every couple of sessions when you level up. It's something that is, like I said, it's on everybody's character sheet. We wanted to use it in some way. I first experimented with it in the home game that I run for my wife and her brothers. I gave the barbarian an axe that when you rage, you can pull some of your hit die, like a pool from your pool of hit die, and use it as like a possible smite once per attack. And it was super fun to like have that, be a super strong item, and then maybe rein it back a little bit when designing these magic item tattoos, or really invest into it, depending on the rarity, depending on how strong we want the item to be. And then a lot of them have nothing to do with that, because we know that we know that there are going to be plenty of people who want these tattoos. The only tattoos that are on D&D Beyond, for example, are ones that came from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and we have no existing plans right now to working with WotC on D&D Beyond or anything. I would love to, but I think that people are really wanting to have that character customization that isn't just a cool new sword or a cool new piece of armor. I think people want that body modification, expressionism of themselves, and there's just some really fun stuff there that we're really diving into.
Yeah, I appreciate that as like a different way to equip your character and imbue your character with these traits that make them unique in these, body expression. And like you mentioned, I think it's very cool that it's something that we haven't seen a lot of representation for. And I think it fits in so well with that sort of high seas piracy setting. Right. Now, you mentioned that you knew that you wanted to do piracy. What was the impetus behind that? How did you sort of land on like, okay, we want to do something that is a seafaring, swashbuckling setting?
It's the art. It's originally when, it's become like apocrypha at this point, but it's all true. Of when I first met Sam was at San Diego Comic-Con 2023. She tattooed a Displacer Beast on my leg, and we got to hang out. Myself, Rick ended up meeting her that weekend as well, and then I got to just hang out with her group a lot. And over the course of the weekend, I asked Sam, "Have you ever worked on a tabletop book or some kind of module or anything?" And she said no. And I said, "Well, man, that'd be really cool to do something together." Because at that point, I didn't consider myself a game designer. I still kind of don't. It's kind of the imposter syndrome of it all. But over the course of the weekend, I asked her, "Well, if you were to work on a D&D or tabletop gaming book with what kind of theme do you think would play in best to your artwork?" And immediately she said, "Well, I think pirates feels really obvious because of pirates and tattoos, and even though they weren't necessarily, it's a little bit oh god, what's the word for? And it's a little bit anachronistic of this art style with pirates because they didn't have these type of tattoos, but there was tattooing in that, in like the golden age of piracy, and so she said tattoos or pirates would be awesome, but also I'm just a big nerd for dungeon crawlers, and I think a dungeon crawler would be cool. So we decided, well, why not both? Like, we don't need dungeon crawlers to be in a medieval castle or underneath the pyramid or what have you. Dungeon crawler can be whatever you want it to be. So why not just make a pirate dungeon crawler? So that's where the idea for pirates came from, and I think we've done I think we've done a good job and had a lot of fun with just rolling with that.
Well, it feels like it's coming at a very good cultural moment as well. I feel like, the global explosion in popularity of One Piece over the last decade in particular. During lockdown, my friend group and we played a lot of Sea of Thieves as this sense of sort of swashbuckling escapism. And it also really speaks to that sense of modularity and possibility you were talking about, because what I love about both of those things, I'm reading through One Piece now, reading the manga, is you never know what you're going to get when you land on one of these islands. Right. And as while you're providing this all of these possibilities and opportunities in sync, it also gives you the scaffolding to build your own adventures on top of. And I really appreciate that as a player and as someone who would be sitting down to play with my home group, because I just love that. I love the setting that it offers, because the high seas as this connective tissue is exciting to me because it feels sort of underserved by the larger sort of tabletop landscape.
Yeah, I think two things. One is that One Piece and Sea of Thieves is absolutely something that we are taking inspiration from, and we even use at the very top of our Kickstarter page. Like, for those of you who love One Piece and Sea of Thieves or whatever, it really is, like you said, the idea of going to an island and having it be, this isn't just a cookie cutter, Caribbean themed pirate adventure. This is a pirate adventure in which, there is that inspiration, but also there is crazy different kinds of pirates, and it's definitely more Western inspired. There's a whole other side of piracy, and especially in like the China Sea and like in Japan and all of that whole like history behind it all. That's something that we are super excited. Maybe Sync 2, I don't know. Our adventure is going to go from 3rd level to 10th level, but we don't, based on the sales for through Kickstarter and when the book is actually available, this might be something where we can make a Sync 2, and it would be really cool to explore different tattoo styles, different historical versions or fantasy historical versions of piracy, and at like higher levels. So there's some really fun stuff that we would love to be able to work on if people are dying for it.
Yeah, well, first of all, I love that idea. Second of all, please call it Or Swim for the second volume. Yeah. So that way it makes the duology. No, I really dig that. I'm curious as well, obviously this is perhaps the ultimate expression of, all of the creative impulses when it comes to sitting down and building like a campaign. But for your home games, when you're sitting down to play with your friends or your family, do you have any homebrew rules or house rules that you like to bring to the table?
I do love the death saves rule of death saves being private to the player and the DM. Depending on how good your player's poker face is. I know that that video that went, that came from Adventuring Academy with Brendan ended up going way more viral than I expected. And a lot of people were commenting saying, "Oh, I already do this at my game," we do death saves where only the DM knows. And I think that's all great. Like, do your own thing. Like, this is just something that I was excited about with games that I run. Home rules, and this isn't to say anything about necessarily in sync. This is just my own game. Is I enjoy crits being max damage plus the roll, because it always sucks if you roll like a 1 on the damage roll and then it's like on the lower half of damage possibility of damage if it wasn't a crit.
No, I dig that. Crits should feel like this cinematic, like larger than life moment.
Yeah,
I 100%
I think crits should have a higher than normal, like minimum. At minimum, it should be higher than normal damage. I don't know. I don't adhere like to a ton of different home rules. I'm sure that when I got off this call, I'll think of 5 or 10.
Yeah, just wake up, don't wake daddy style in the middle of the night. I've got it.
Yeah. I do love. Oh, I remember what I was going to say earlier. One of the things that we know is something that is like wanted, and people. There are so many people that are hoping for this in Dungeons and Dragons is a rule for like sea battles and like ship to ship combat. That's not something that we are doing in Sync. That's something that we wanted to pick our lane and just really push forward with it. And that's the magic item tattoos. That's the modular dungeons. That's the sunken condition. We decided that this isn't something that we're super excited about. This is something that people have already done. People ask is there going to be sea combat? No, but people have done that before. People have made whole Kickstarters or modules about that. I think it was the people who created Pirate Borg. Their own 5e expansion has ship battles and stuff. So we would push people to them. Like, we don't need to do the thing that people have already done. We want to do what we're excited about, what hasn't been done before, which is. I think that I'm pretty sure there has not been any D&D supplement module, what have you, that uses American traditional tattoo art as its main art style or only art style. So that's, to answer any possible comments or anything like, is there sea combat? I'll give it not even a spoiler, but a hint that there is a version of sea combat that we are doing that is going to be a very cool NPC that I think is one of the things that we are the most excited about designing and developing is this whole. I don't even want to spoil it because it's super fun. But there is a bad actor on the seas, a pirate you might say, who's not necessarily looking for gold out there or souls for that matter.
A secret third resource, hit dice.
Secret third thing, yeah.
I love that. No, I can appreciate that, and I like that you're not trying to be all things to all people. You're trying to do the thing that you folks are particularly passionate about, and that's what I love about any sort of home game is that you're able to sort of mix and match the modules, supplements, all the materials that you want to make it tailored to your experience, and I think that's sort of the beauty of tabletop role-playing games. It can be what you want. You can play exactly what's written on the page, or you can break it wide open, completely rebuild it, and model it after whatever the hell floats your boat to keep it nautically themed here. I'm curious as well. We've talked a lot about D&D, but are there any other? And you're probably living in that space quite a bit with Sync. Are there any other role-playing games or tabletop games that you're particularly fond of playing that you wish maybe got a bit more shine in the wider space?
I'm so disappointed that I didn't get to do it this last Halloween, but my favorite thing to do on Halloween, or at least the spooky season, is to run either a game of Dread or a game of 10 Candles.
Yes, dude.
Dread is the Jenga combat, not combat, but Jenga mechanic game where if the tower falls during your turn, your character is dead usually. And there's some really, really fun there's nothing that ratchets up the tension more than waiting for the player to pull from that tower when it's on its last legs. It is some of the most fun role playing that I've ever experienced. And then 10 Candles is such to spoil it for people who haven't played, and it's not really a spoiler. It's a what's it called? Dramatic horror, or I forget exactly what they call it, but it's your character is going to die at the end. It's all about what you're able to do and the story you're able to tell with your fellow players that matters in the end. And it's a really cool kind of through line between all games. And I think my favorite thing about it is the character creation side, because you get to build your own character, but but attributes are coming from other players when you start your game, because you start the game creating those characters with the other people at your table. So there's not a whole lot you need to come to the table with. It's just like a set of dice. And honestly, you don't even need to come with your own set of dice. The DM comes with the dice, and there's a candle and some note cards. That's all you need to play. And then Kids on Bikes. I love Kids on Bikes, and I'm actually in the process. We just signed a contract that I'm working with Hunters Entertainment to develop its new supplement, Kids in Cleats. So they've done
That's awesome.
They've done Kids on Bikes, they've done Kids on Brooms. They are in the process of publishing Kids in Capes, and the next project that they're going to be doing is Kids in Cleats, which obviously gets this whole youth and high school sports aspect to it all. I'm going to be working with Abria Iyengar to develop her rules of scuppers from the Dimension 20 season, in which they're playing like a Quidditch-like game. Mm-hmm. So that's something that I'm super excited to really dive in head first on, because I don't have enough fingers and enough pies, I guess. Which I think is the expression.
Yes,
there's just a lot that I want to do.
I really never expected to love sports anime as much as I did, but I think there's a lot to love there, and that a lot that would transfer over to a tabletop setting as well. So I think that's really exciting. And plus, I love the team over at Hunters Entertainment, so that's very exciting to hear.
No, we're really excited about that. We got to announce it at PAX Unplugged this last year when I was running a panel called Athletes in Tabletop for Abria, for Iffy Wadaway, and for Tank Tolman. We had a full crowd. It was super cool, and we ended the panel by announcing that with Nox Ignatius in the crowd, and who works with hunters. So it was just a really cool experience of the panel going great, and then getting to make this cool announcement with Abria on the panel itself.
Yeah, best possible environment. Just like that's the freeze frame shot at the end
in
of
Philly,
the movie.
The team, the city that won the Super Bowl.
Oh, mate, yes, hell yeah, go Birds. Sorry to any Chiefs fans watching this right now.
No.
We're going to wrap things up shortly, but I just want to ask you one final question. We've talked a lot about running games, designing adventures, things like that. What's a piece of advice you would give to someone who's maybe prepping to run their first game or wants to shake things up in their existing game?
I think one thing that I love about all of the modules and the supplements that have come out is that really all of them are modular in their own way, not just in the adventure storytelling aspect of it all, and not just in like the magic items or the spells and stuff that they bring to the table. It's there is so much room in everybody's campaign for a complete left turn, and introducing I think one thing that was super cool was in the finale, or part of the finale of the most recent campaign of NADPOD. This isn't spoiling anything, but they end up bringing in a mechanic for like a big, large scale battle that they pulled from an MCDM book, which I think was amazing. And it felt so evocative, and the players picked it up immediately. And there was no like second guessing themselves of like, is this the right thing to do? Or at least from a listener point of view. And I think it was one of the best things that they could have done was instilling something that is brand new. It's not just like a little mini game for like the carnival little session that you're doing, kind of a filler session. This isn't just like, pulling in a spell or again, a homebrew subclass or something. This is like, okay, I want this to be D&D, but I also want this to be D&D and blackjack. I want this to be D&D and dread, maybe like pulling in the Jenga tower of it all. I think that there's so much, like you mentioned earlier. Everybody plays Dungeons and Dragons differently, and I don't think there's any wrong way to play Dungeons and Dragons as long as everybody's having fun. And I think if you're prioritizing storytelling, and if that storytelling is best served by bringing in new mechanics that isn't even Dungeons and Dragons, then you're hurting yourself if you're not doing that. So I think let your mind go wild, allow different mechanics. It doesn't have to be dice. It can be Jenga blocks. It can be Lincoln logs. I don't care. Like, it can be anything you want if you're able to develop some cool mechanics behind it, as long as they're well thought out. It's I know every DM I know overthinks their sessions and stuff. So I can't imagine that bringing in a mechanic to your table is not going to be overthought as well. But I think go wild. Like there's nothing cooler as a player than finding out that your DM put in all this work for something that isn't even Dungeons and Dragons and bring it to your D&D table. So that's more of an experienced DM, I think, tip than anything else. But that's what I would give is like really branch out. There's so many other games that already have these mechanics behind it, and there's so many games that are, Mahjong is what, like 5,000 years old or something. It's like pull from anything, but use inspiration everywhere you find it from, and you don't have to have game designer in your title. like unfortunately I do. I don't know, I always feel like I mentioned earlier, I always feel weird when I say that that's my title. But you don't have to be a game designer to do game design in your own game.
I love that. And to sort of bring it back around to something you mentioned earlier is, the internet has democratized the way that we can access all of these amazing things that so many people have made, both just as a hobby, as a professional pursuit. There's a surfeit of so much amazing content and resources and ideas that you can take and apply to your home game to something you're trying to produce for a mass audience, that it's a great time to be a player. It's a great time to be a DM. It's a great time to be a designer. So I really appreciate that sort of mix and match approach and just being willing to go paint outside the lines a little bit there.
And then listen to your players. Like if it was a swing and a miss, then it was a swing and a miss. You got two other strikes that you can work with. You're fine. Exactly.
Third strike, they do put you in DM jail. That is how legally it has to work. That is the one rule that applies. Well, fantastic. Johnny, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people find you online, and where can they learn more about Sync?
I'm not active on Twitter anymore. I pulled the plug on that. My account's still there if you want to follow it. But I am at Johnny Stanton IV, JohnnyStanton IV, the fourth. And I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Instagram. I'm on TikTok, but not very active on TikTok. Not very good at that. But yeah, if you're interested in any of the stuff that I've been talking about, go check out syncripg.com, and that'll take you to the backer kit where you can pre-order your own book, your own copy of Sync Adventures on the Call to Reach Sea.
Fantastic. Folks, go check that out. And if you want more talks with amazing people around the world of gaming, or deep dives into stuff that we do here on Geek and Sundry, you can find us each and every day on youtube.com/Geek and Sundry, or wherever fine podcasts are served. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.